This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome to New York Wines Online. We're very excited to start this first episode of our four-part series following the theme of what it means to be bold, where our host Elaine Chukan Brown will speak with producers from across the state's diverse wine regions, alongside other important industry players, to explore the deep roots and fresh ground that define New York wine today. So today we focus on New York State as a whole with two pioneers of the industry and a special guest to offer their trade perspective. Some of you will have received tasting kits with these wines to taste along with the panel. So I hope you have your wines ready to go, and we will cue you when we are ready to start with the tasting. So before I hand it over to our host, which is Elaine. I just have a few housekeeping notes. So I'd like to point out that there are two communication methods available to participants. We have a chat section and then a Q&A section. So if you have a question for the panel, for the host, please drop it in the Q&A section. And please also note that the questions are available and visible to all participants. So in some cases, you can hide those, but we have it set to being visible. So just know that when you type in your question, that's visible to everyone. And then the chat section is an informal way for you to communicate with other participants. And then, as you will have heard, the session is also being recorded. So our host today is Elaine Chukan Brown. Elaine serves as a global wine educator and journalist specializing in global initiatives for sustainability and climate action, most especially in U.S. wine. And Brown serves as a columnist for Decanter magazine and previously was the executive editor for the U.S. for JancisRobinson.com. And Elaine will be joined by our special trade guest, Maya Johnson-Dunn of New York Kitchen, and our winemaker panelists, John Wagner of Wagner Vineyards Estate Winery and Roman Roth of Wolfer Estate Vineyard. So I'll hand it over.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I'm thrilled with this lineup of speakers, but I'm also really excited to see who has signed in. We have people from all over the country. A number of people do have tasting kits, as we mentioned, but for anyone that doesn't have a tasting kit, we're going to talk about the wines in relation to a bigger context. So don't worry, anyone who's tasting the wine, really it's about understanding the bigger picture of New York State. I want to be sure people realize too, this is a four-part series. So today's first webinar is an introduction and overview looking at New York and some of the key elements that we want to be sure people are aware of. But then over the next 3 weeks, we'll be doing deep dives into different regions as well. So next week, actually, same time, online again, will be a deep dive into Hudson Valley. So today, though, we have, again, two producers that will be talking to us from two different sides of the state and really helping us understand the history, the growing conditions, and like key issues that the state is looking at today. And we have, to begin, Maya Johnson-Dunn. So Maya Johnson-Dunn serves as beverage director for New York Kitchen, has an incredible range of experience working directly in education with trade as well as consumers, showing wines through the tasting room there, and has been doing incredible work through her writing career. Most recently, she's been writing for Decanter magazine, the international publication, one of the most respected magazines in the world, and has also done a lot of writing work for New York State Wine and Grape Commission. They have a lot of really informative online and print information that Maya has been part of helping to develop, and also for city newspaper. She also has actually contributed to the upcoming 5th edition of the Oxford Companion to Wine as well, really helping to uncover information about New York State and its regions through that highly respected publication. John Wagner is the 4th generation grape grower and the son of Wagner Vineyards founder Stanley Wagner. He grew up in the vines there in the Finger Lakes, helped build the winery alongside his father, and has been part of the growth and development of Wagner Vineyards from its beginning. He actually, though, previously studied mechanical engineering at Rochester Institute of Technology and then came back to Wagner full-time in the 1990s today serving as general manager and co-owner alongside his sister. He's played a really important role in the state in terms of innovating and helping to grow really sustainable wine growing practices and providing fruit for winemakers all over the state, while also leading the way for wine growing for Wagner Vineyards itself. Roman Roth serves as the winemaker and partner of Wolfer Estate Vineyard and is actually the founding winemaker, really helping to develop the signature of Wolfer Estate, while also consulting with other vineyards and wineries throughout the region, and has really dedicated his most recent career to helping to grow awareness of and the success of Long Island. But at the same time, he actually previously has been part of wine growing and winemaking in other parts of the world as well, growing wine in Europe and also working in Australia. And I have to say, since I am dialing in from California, that he did work here at Saintsbury, and before then going on to Rosemont Estate in New South Wales and working as winemaker in Germany, also earning his Master of Winemaking and Cellar Master degree there in Germany as well. We have an incredible panel, really great resources for information. As Katie mentioned, please feel free to participate in the chat. We're excited to see where you're calling in from. And the Q&A is available for people to read and keep up with questions coming in. So feel free to ask that as well. Now, Maya, I want to start with you because, again, you have this unique position of having contact with trade, with consumers, but then also writing for an international audience on wines of the state. And so one of the things that you and I have talked about is how, Wolfer and Wagner have played in two different, very different areas of New York State. They've both played these really crucial roles in helping to develop the success of their regions, but also in a way as being really very welcoming wineries for people that are new to New York State wine. So I was hoping we could start there and that you could tell us more about that.
Sure. Thank you also for that fantastic introduction, Elaine. You make me sound very fancy, and I appreciate it.
You are fancy.
I'm a big fan of Wolfer and Wagner for this reason. As somebody who is educating in this industry, I feel that access is important, and creating a gateway for new audiences is important. And I feel like every year an article comes out about how the customers that drink wine are dying off, and what are we going to do? And everybody panics, and not much happens. But I think it's naturally built into what Wolfer and Wagner are doing, which I think is amazing. So specific to Wolfer, their offerings include wine, ciders, 0 proof offerings, and Roman, keep me honest if I'm saying anything incorrect. And just so far so good. By just having these options already, you've opened up the doors for a lot of different people to find an entry point into that wine. But even more striking to me is their rosé, the Summer in a Bottle. The bottle is literally iconic. So you are by default getting a whole new audience of people who might be curious about wine by the look of the bottle and because they know they might like rosé. On top of that, they've got vineyards not only in New York, but also in France, Argentina, and Spain. So there's another entry point into New York specific wines from those who might be thinking that they only like to drink old world wines from Europe. So I think there are 2 really interesting entry points for new audiences to kind of come in and then bring their way. Once you sort of learn this brand, start to love it, you start to taste around through other New York offerings, and it just kind of hooks somebody into loving New York. On the other side of things at Wagner, I think, Wagner is a winery first and foremost. Then they opened a cafe, then they opened a brewery. So there are just a lot of different ways to enjoy your time in that space. If you find yourself in the Finger Lakes traveling with a lot of people who like different things, you have instantly found a location where you can go and everybody's happy. But on top of that, they are focused not only on vinifera, but hybrid grapes. And with the use of hybrid, you find yourself able to make a wine that can come at a more entry-level price point. So when you're looking to expand that audience, it's a great gateway for you to bring in somebody new. And then once they're known, you can start to teach them about the really cool stuff with New York and Finger Lakes wine especially. So I think the 2 of them on different playing fields are allowing people to come in and then learn and then start to fall in love with New York wine.
Well, and so tell us a little bit more too, Maya, about kind of what you see with consumer response You mentioned the affordability of some wines, but honestly, in the grand scheme of things, New York wines tend to really over deliver and have incredible quality at more affordable prices. So how do you see consumer response to New York wines?
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I helped harvest one year and decided after sorting grapes for a full day that wine is severely underpriced in New York. It's a lot of hard work. I think that consumers, when they come into our space at New York Kitchen, are curious about what we do here. We feature wines from across the state. And when they start to learn that the quality is not matched by the price point, they get really excited about being able to try more and buy bottles. And so that sort of ROI is really pretty incredible when we talk about New York wines.
Yeah. So starting with a look at the Finger Lakes, it's right. Maybe we could pull up the map just briefly because it's, I'm sorry, I said the Finger Lakes, I meant Long Island. Like if you look at Long Island and down in the lower right-hand corner, it's right next to New York City. The idea that we have this incredible, high quality, dynamic wine region directly beside one of the most important cities of the world is really remarkable. Because, a lot of times we get caught thinking of wine regions as being really remote. And, the Long Island has this incredible history of agriculture. I have to say that when I have been able to do wine trips over there, I have completely lost my mind over the produce. The quality of produce grown on Long Island is fantastic, but then there's this great mix of meats and seafoods as well. And, one of the interesting coincidences of bringing John and Roman together on this session is that they both really took hold of their respective wineries in the 1990s. And so, Roman, in your case, you've seen the growth of Long Island wine. Of course, wineries went in a little earlier than that, a whole decade prior, but you're in such a unique position on one of the few wineries on the South Fork. As Maya was describing, you've really helped create an actual destination. And it's opened people's minds to realize New York wine is quality and it exists. But could you tell us just briefly a little bit more about that evolution, the growth of Long Island that you've seen?
Well, I think the title being bold, I think is a really good title because there is a lot to it. At the time, when people drank, 40 years ago, when people drank sweet wines, heavy, oaky, fat, alcoholic wines from hot climates, basically, or it had to be a big French name, a famous chateau, or Italian famous, Brunello Montalcino or something. And Long Island, you could see on the pictures surrounded by the ocean. So there's two things about this. In one way, it protects us. We can grow fantastic grapes here because we are blessed by the sea breeze. We don't get winter damage. We don't get spring frosts. It's the last area in New York State to get a frost in the fall, which gives us a really long hang time. So there's a fabulous climate, has been compared to Bordeaux, but there's simply a uniqueness about it. So that's the foundation. With that, you can really create great things. Secondly, that we are in the heart of, close to Manhattan, allows us to make, special wines, specialty wines, make unique things. We don't have to follow trends. We can create our own trend. We don't have to follow the magazines and wait for ratings. We can make our own connections. We can there in 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you're in the city, you make friendships, you can. That's the key, relationship building. So that has helped us also to stay true to our style. And the true style about Long Island, which is now it makes it very special in America, which a bold statement now makes us the most food-friendly wines in America, is the sea breeze, this surrounding by the ocean that we make. Our top red wines have 13.8 volume percent. Our rosé is 12.5. You don't even find that in hot climates, barely. If you find it, people have to pick it early and underripe, so to keep lower, or add water to keep lower alcohol. And for us, we have this slow and steady ripening curve, and that gives us this vibrancy, freshness, light, elegancy. And if you work well in your vineyard and you have great sites and you spend money in your vineyard, you can make great layers and texture and intensity along with the light and fresh character. So that's a unique character, makes Long Island quite special. And So another bold statement, it gives longevity. You need acidity, and you need freshness. And so, that this red wine can age 30, 40 years, or our white wines 25 years. These are bold statements, and I back it up. Well, a good wine back this up.
Well, I think it's really important to point out that you have the length of experience at Wolfer Estate to be able to make that claim now. You started at Wolfer, I think it was 92, and you've been able to make, as Maya was pointing out, you're known for rosé. Like, you changed the wine landscape in Long Island, but also in New York State, bringing so much attention to rosé and the success it can have there. And so I love that we're starting with this bold red, because New York State tends to be known for Riesling. You are known for rosé, and we're saying actually Long Island can make these Bordeaux-based red blends really beautifully. And so, you have this multiple decades of proof that they do age. But Maya, going back to you just briefly, before Roman tells us more about the particular wine, so we're talking about the Wolfer 2019 Fatalis Fatum. How do, your consumers that come into New York Kitchen have to be surprised when they have a wine like this from New York. Can you tell us briefly, how does this play in the market?
Yeah, so one of the questions I get the most if I'm working in our tasting room is, what red wine do we have that's closest to a California Cab Sauv? And it just hurts my heart every time, because you're missing the point of traveling to wine regions and exploring what they can do with the land and the terroir, what they have around them. So I always point them towards red blends like this. It tends to surprise people to learn that you can get the body, the weight, the grip in New York when you create something like this. And these red style blends tend to do really well for our consumer base who's looking for some oomph that also pairs really well with food.
Well, and so, but
I think it's like what Maya also said was this entry point. So we have a lot of rosé. I mean, we make 120,000 cases of rosé now, but so you reach a lot of people. But at the end, sooner or later, there are also the entry points of the high-end wines where some people just want to buy expensive wines. They don't want to buy, it's one of these things. It must be expensive, so otherwise it can't be good. And and that's when you make certain wines like the Fatalis Fatum. There's this red blend, or our top Chardonnays, top wines, which reach those customers well. So we really try to hit on both sides of the spectrum, and whatever works basically at the end. We're still a young region, 50 years this year, Long Island. So you really work on the high end and you work on the entry level and of the fun wines. And together, I think it draws the picture of how great Long Island is, or New York State.
Well, I mean, I really enjoyed this wine just on its own. I think if you go back to, Roman, the growing conditions you were talking about, one of the advantages is that Long Island reds like this, there's this real intensity of flavor and this strong presence in the mouth, but it's making my mouth water, and there's something very lithe and fresh about it at the same time. And so I see this as an incredible bridge wine that, right, if the consumer is still naive to New York wine and wants something recognizable, as Maya, you were describing, this is a perfect wine to point them to, but then at the same time, it has that structure and finesse that, a more European mindset is going to be interested in as well. And so it's this beautiful bridge between the two. But Roman, let's be really direct. Can you grow and make this wine every year?
We make this wine every year. It's just what varies. There could be a cooler year where we don't make less of it, of our best. We only use our best sites, our oldest vineyards for this. It's again a blend Merlot, Cap Franc, Cap Sauvignon, Petit Verdot. The big, elephant of climate change is hanging over everybody's neck and it's really going to be a problem in the future. But for cool climates like Long Island, it has been in some ways a blessing, where we've ripened. I mean, just to give you the growing degree days, the average growing degree days on Long Island, for example, in 2009, we had 2,648 to 2,648. In 2019, when this wine was made, it's 3,045. In 2020, we had 3,197. In 2021, we had 3,454. To give you Bordeaux, for example,
big increase each year. Yeah.
The average in Bordeaux is 2,432. The average in Napa, actually in 2022, Napa had 3,313 and St. Helena had 3,732 in California, Napa. So we are certainly in the middle. If you're looking off the map, there's Bordeaux, there is California, and Long Island is really nicely positioned in the middle, has the sea breeze, the cooler nights, which gives us this natural acidity that hot climates can only dream of, and 13.5 volume percent. You barely find that in a hot climate, so to have a lower alcohol level. And that really makes us unique. And in the last couple of years, especially Cab Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, Merlot, we've done really well every year in Cab Franc, but the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've done really well with Cab Sauvignon and Petit Verdot and Malbec even. We just won Best Malbec in New York State with the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. So those are varieties you would never normally think. And if you did think of them, they were a bit astringent and mouth-puckering like 20 years ago. Now they are voluptuous, fruit-driven, elegant, but still not heavy, still our cool sea breeze influence. Yeah. So really a lovely combination that gives longevity, that stands up to meat, stands up to the biggest dishes, and just improves. This wine is way too young. I mean, actually, it's quite nice. The small bottles, I just tasted them versus the big bottle, and there certainly was a nice opening up. It certainly added a year or 2 or 3 years of aging, if you ask me, just from my experience. So I was wondering how these little bottles will show. So this is a great wine that needs some time, needs decanting, needs opening up, and can stand up to the great wines in the world. So I'm very excited. Long macerations on the skin. I leave up to 28 days on the skin, 24 days skin maceration, 21 months in oak, in barrique barrels. 40% is new oak. I think 44% is new oak, actually, to be correct. So, but oak has to be balanced. I don't like an oaky monster. So I think, I think we achieved. If we only could always achieve balance in life, I joke, but I think it's a nice balance on this wine with the oak and with the tannins and with the fruit and the cassis and the berry notes.
Yeah. So I want to make sure people remember that what Roman just pointed out, that the method of rebottling keeps the character of the wine intact, but because it in some ways introduces a little bit more oxygen to the wine, it opens it up in a way that it is it's just a little bit more open. It drinks as if there's a little bit more age on it than if you were to buy it from the bottle. So think about that as you're tasting these wines, because this Fetus Fatalum, it is known for its ageability and its integrity as a red wine. I also want to point out one other thing before we move into tasting the Riesling with John, that the growing conditions of Long Island, the degree days have increased the last few years, but because it's surrounded by water, there's this persistent breeze and a freshness that means that even if the wines get slightly riper flavor character, they retain acidity and that mouth-watering tension. And I think remembering that is really important. And so as we're going to keep talking about these wines, but I want to bring John into the conversation. John, later we're going to talk about how red blends look in the Finger Lakes. But what I want to bring up with you, New York State is known for Riesling, and the Finger Lakes have really established that reputation, and you have gotten to see that full progression. The Finger Lakes have been growing wine literally for centuries, which is incredible. It's one of the oldest wine growing regions in the world, actually, and I mean in the country, and yet it's become more recently really famous for its Riesling. And you returned to Wagner in 1990, but you actually grew up growing grapes and then helped build Wagner Vineyards with your dad before that. So could you talk to us about that evolution, the role Riesling has played and how you've seen it develop there?
Sure. So yeah, my dad was a lifelong grape grower for the Taylor Wine Company, growing French-American hybrids and natives. And we planted our first Riesling in 1978. So I got to see that going in the ground, and it was really for us kind of figuring out how we were going to grow it, doing it similarly to how we were growing everything else. Training systems were similar to what we had for the hybrids, up on top wire. And for the first few years we grew it, we were picking those Riesling based a lot of times on disease pressure. So some of our early wines in the winery were a learning curve is growing vinifera, because there wasn't much vinifera planted in the Finger Lakes. So we began to expand in Chardonnay and Gewurz and Riesling, and then followed that with the Bordeaux Reds and Pinot Noir. And for the first 15 years or so of the winery, we had those planted in roughly equal amounts. And in the mid 90s, my dad and I sat down and really we really thought that Riesling was working extremely well. We loved the versatility of it, the breadth of wine that we could make from bone dry up to semi-sweet and dessert wines. And we liked how it was overwintering. So we are growers first. We have 240 acres of grapes right now. And it's key as far as, can we grow it? Can we overwinter it? And that, if that decision and that answer is no, that variety is not going to be planted on the farm. So Riesling seemed to check all the boxes, and we began to expand our acreage there. Planting different clones, different rootstocks. Our farm is a little bit spread out. So we are on the east side of Seneca Lake. We have blocks now that are down close to the lake, 700. The wine that we're going to taste today, the Kaywood East, is 1,000 feet above sea level. It's my highest elevation vinifera site, which a lot of people think you lose some of your lake influence as you get away from the lake, which is true, but this site is very unique in the fact that it's super steep. So we get some natural air drainage. Cold air, being more dense than warm air, wants to come down and pool next to the ground and next to the vines. But because this site is so steep, that cold air can rush down the hill out over the lake and get some convective warming there. So we've really we've expanded the Riesling acreage. That's a photo of Kaywood East there. We now have 62 acres of Riesling, multiple clones and rootstocks, different elevation, different age vineyards. And it's really added to the complexity of our Riesling program here in the winery, because we harvest every block separately. We vinify everything separately. And then in the spring, we have kind of a nice, interesting day here where we'll do a blind taste test of all the different lots of Riesling that we have in here before we do any of our blending trials. So we are 100% estate bottled, meaning every wine that you get from Wagner Vineyards is from grapes we grow on the farm. And as you pointed out, Elaine, we also sell to other wineries in the region as well.
Well, and the truth is, Wagner Vineyards has played a really important role in providing fruit sourcing for other winemakers in the state, not just in the Finger Lakes. And in that way, you provide a foundation for the. And there's Roman raising his hand. He gets fruit from Wagner Vineyards.
John is a great, fabulous grower, and for our rosé, we have a big rosé program, and I love blending. And certainly hats off to John. He's a fantastic grower, and we certainly buy some Riesling and some Gewürztraminer from John.
Well, can you comment briefly, Roman, on just, it's a little different because it's varietally specific too, but just the contrast as you see fruit come in from John and the Finger Lakes, like what's like one key difference or something important for people to know in the contrast between the two regions?
Well, for us, for our rosé program, you can only make great rosé if you use great vineyard sites. And so that is important, where you don't treat it like a garbage can and let's use the bad vineyard, let's use the fruit that didn't ferment properly and throw it in the rosé. So we deliberately make a rosé, and as a result, it is wonderful to work with great growers who what can I say, like, we don't have these traditional boots on of tradition. We where this has to be from this vineyard site, and otherwise it can't be called whatever Montrachet. And so we can work with different growers and make whatever makes the best blend and what works best for the wine. And so that's for the rosé program, but still it's the same applies even to make rosé. If you want nice rosé, use use a good grower, and then you get a much better result.
And John is really one of the most respected growers, not just in New York State, but the Eastern Seaboard. And Wagner Vineyards has had a really important history again in helping grow the region. And so, John, though, with Riesling, one of the signatures of wine growing in New York State is vintage variability. And you're pointing out that Kaywood East works because even though it's further from the lake, and we know lakes have a moderating effect, help create more even growing conditions in extreme weather. Because it's so high up on the hill, the cold air is pushed down the slope, and that provides a little bit of warming in the vineyard, but also means the frost moves downhill away from those vines. Can you comment just briefly a little bit more on like how Riesling does in these changing conditions and through different vintage conditions as well?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the reasons we decided to really expand our acreage on Riesling is how well it did perform in conditions. Its varietal characteristic can be expressed, and I say in a dry year, warm year, cool year, wet year, as long as you can keep it clean and you can keep foliage operating late in the season. And as Roman said about hang times, we're really key on hanging fruit longer and getting it to physical maturity. And if you've got shaded fruit that's underneath canopy in this kind of rainy environment that we get in some years, it's very difficult with Riesling because it is thinner skinned. So we do a lot as far as training systems. Everything we have on vinifera is Scott Henry training system. So it's vertically divided canopy with shoots vertically upward and shoot that naturally opens up the fruit zone, which is really key for Riesling. You got to get the fruit in the sun. We supplement that with leaf removal in the fruit zone. So it really can reach some super flavors and ripe maturity at low sugar levels, where we were talking earlier about Bordeaux Reds, and like Cab Sauv, we do very well in certain years, but there's some years where we feel like we are not going to make a varietal Cab Sauv because the growing degree days was lower, and it didn't make the cut for what our estate bottled Cab Sauv is going to be. In those cooler years, Riesling can still come through and make some pretty fabulous wines. So I think, like I said, early 90s, there was people for plantings a little bit, and there really was no signature variety in the vinifera side to the Finger Lakes, and it quickly became Riesling, and everybody really has seen the versatility of it. And I think as growers have gotten better at how they were going to get it right, we really do a lot of work pre-plant before we put a vineyard in now, deep ripping the soil, pattern drain tiling the soil. So there's a lot more that's going into this to get uniform vine size and to get vineyard survivability. So we have some temperatures sometimes in the winter that are 10 below 0 Fahrenheit, and that's really tough on vinifera vines. So we hill all of our graft unions in the fall as added protection for those temperatures in the wintertime. So we're doing everything we can to really try to mitigate our risk, but it is still a risky endeavor.
Well, and so I want to make sure people remember so next week we'll talk Hudson Valley. In 2 weeks, we're going to dig in really closely to Long Island. And then in the final week, 3 weeks from now, we're going to look really closely at the Finger Lakes. But just briefly, I want to bring out something that John said, which is a contrast point between Finger Lakes and Long Island. So Long Island is creating incredible Bordeaux-based red blends, as Roman is showcasing and talked about. And as John was just mentioning, Finger Lakes can make incredible Bordeaux-based red wines as well, but it tends to be vintage specific, so it's less consistent. But in this particular vintage, Maya, to to focus in on the Kaywood East that we're tasting right now. It's the 2020 vintage. It's considered a sunlight vintage. Roman mentioned briefly growing degree days and the Long Island side there. There was incredible sun and warmth that came from this vintage. So you get this this real cascade of flavors, but again, the acidity is still there, which is so beautiful. As John was talking about, though, Riesling can be made across the entire range of styles. The Kaywood East is a dry style Riesling. It's very, very low residual sugar. And so Maya, again, coming back to that broader perspective, that global outlook, how would you describe the signature of Riesling, Seneca Lake, you know, as we're seeing here, Finger Lakes, or New York State? What do you think is the signature of Riesling for the state?
You know, just sort of a couple of things that you said go into this answer. You know, vintage variation is a real thing here. So with Riesling, it's a perfect wine to communicate sense of place, and you can really taste where it's grown and also what the year was like. And like you said, 2020 was just outstanding. The gift that 2020 gave us in the Finger Lakes was wine. We see in the Finger Lakes sort of this convergence of all the great things about wine regions around the world, in my opinion. You know, you've got, we're on a similar latitude as Bordeaux, similar cool temperatures, and even some soils like you see in the Mosel in Germany, just these beautiful hills and soils, and all of it is picked up in the flavor of the wine. And, you know, it's not just the lakes that are moderating the temperature and making this all possible, the 11 that you see immediately in the Finger Lakes when you're driving around, but it's also Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and all of that makes this possible here. So Riesling in New York is a way of life.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Riesling is a way of life.
I just may interject quickly that
yes, please.
There is no region in the world anymore that is safe. Although Burgundy had frost in 21, you know, Sancerre had lost 70% to frost. California has fires and drought issues. Spain has huge drought issues. The whole south of Europe has drought issues. So we are, I think, in a very blessed region where there is still a good amount of rainfall. You know, we're on the same latitude as Madrid and Naples on Long Island. Finger Lakes is a tiny bit further north, but there is a lot of positive things that we have, and people in the future, you know, this will certainly come up more into play, because, you know, there's the classic old regions are all facing climate problems, and so you know, so is the whole world. So I think we're in a very good position to position these wines as these quality wines and food-friendly wines and longevity.
Well, and I think with that, it's an important time to bring up that, you know, New York State has made a huge push around sustainability efforts. They've actually been working on building their own New York State specific sustainability certification for years now. And it's important for those of us that are not growers or not winemakers to remember these things take a lot of time, because New York State's effort was very much designed to ensure that the sustainability certification program could be relevant to growers of all sizes and wineries of all sizes. So small family owned to larger, higher production, and everything in between has now being addressed by this new certification program. So the certification program has just, it's been in the beta stage for several years, but actually this year, it's very exciting. Quite a few vineyards and wineries were certified this year. So congratulations, New York State, on getting to that stage of the certification process. It's very exciting. And that said, New York State has actually been invested in sustainability efforts for quite a long time. And so I want us to, I need to manage time, but I also want us to at least talk about this briefly. John and Roman, you have both been involved in sustainability mindset from the founding of your wineries. And, you know, Roman, Wolfer was founded with this in mind. And so could you briefly, just again, I want to manage time, but could you briefly tell us, what do you think is the most important for us in the wine trade to understand about these sustainability efforts?
Because in our case, because of the humidity, we have high humidity on Long Island because we're surrounded by the ocean. So managing these completely beautiful canopies, people say we grow topiaries instead of vineyards. When you see our vineyard, it's immaculate. And we do that so there is no pockets of moisture, that the sea breeze quickly dries dew, quickly dries any rain, or, you know, dries moisture. So, and you don't have these shady pockets. And so as a result, this is a huge part of being sustainable. The
Yeah.
rest is, not use herbicides, not, use only organic fertilizers, and trying to, every step and every process where you have, green zones. And anyway, so this is a natural way of growing healthy grapes and surviving hurricane remnants and whatever there could be. And by doing that, I always say everybody can make good wine in a good year, but the great wineries make great wines in the difficult years. And sustainability is part of that, of the long-term goal, how to achieve. In the long run, will there be some organic vineyards? So far, there is none, but there will be in the future. But at this stage, we still is building the reputation and breaking prejudice that New York and Long Island and the Finger Lakes can grow world-class wine. And in the future, there will be other steps towards, going another step further. But at this stage, we're still building this reputation.
Yeah. Well, and
so
that humidity,
that's where we are.
New York State has been able to reduce and limit herbicides and also pesticides. And the challenge in a growing region that has more humidity ends up being the mildew pressure. And so that's part of what Roman was getting at. But John, one of the things, what that point Roman just made, like the difference between good and great wine is this longevity mindset. And that's what sustainability is all about. But the only way to establish that longevity mindset and really actually deliver it is by taking care of your people, because it's our people that do the farming. It's our people that make the wine. It's our people that support the business and the community. And Wagner Vineyards really stands out in that you made a concerted effort to focus in on the people side of your business, both in terms of how you take care of your employees, what expectations how they're treated by the customers, but also how they treat the customers. And I love that, I just always remember when I was a little kid, I would walk into restaurants and I would see this sign, we reserve the right to refuse service, at the same time that they were saying the customer is always right. And I think I became a philosopher because I was trying to resolve this conundrum,
Right.
But so something Wagner has done is create a code of conduct. It's publicly published. And I know that other businesses around the state have actually started calling you and asking for advice and insight on how to do this. So could you briefly tell us about that code of conduct and the people side of sustainability?
Yeah. So just to contrast your experience with the sign, we have a white oak carved sign over our door that says welcome. And I always feel that my family has been welcoming and inclusive, and we have a long track record of that. But I really felt it was important for us to really define it and to make sure that our staff knew that these feelings were coming from the top down. So we brought in Dr. Paul Unetti, and she was insightful in helping the staff work through some of these issues and really bring to light some of these issues and how we could better deal with it. And I've always thought, my dad always thought, this was like inviting people into our living room. And it really bothered me to know that some people could actually come to a place and not feel welcome or feel uneasy about something. So we want to make sure that from within, we were not going to tolerate anything like that, either from staff or from other customers to fellow customers that were coming in. And I think really work through some different scenarios and role playing on our part so that we knew how to deal with everything better, and just presenting as welcoming of an environment as possible. When people come to the Finger Lakes and they come to our winery, we are inviting. We want you to be here. We want you to have a great time. And I think defining it has been helpful for us, and it's been helpful for some fellow wineries around the area to say, hey, this is an important topic and we really need to address it.
I think something that's important to bring out here is that a lot of people want to be welcoming. A lot of people want to be friendly and thoughtful and kind. But the truth is that when we are open to interacting with lots of different people from lots of different parts of the world, we have to remember that respecting each other's cultural differences and differences in background is part of doing that effectively. And so part of what Wagner has done in actually articulating and defining a code of conduct. They have kind of set the groundwork for people understanding what respect looks like. And that's a really crucial thing. One other thing I want to point out is that, Wagner actually decided it wasn't enough to do this only with hospitality staff. The training would be with every single employee of Wagner Vineyards. And so that from vineyards through beer production, through winemaking, through tasting room, all the way across the board, all of the employees have participated in this conversation and understanding what it means to be welcoming, to help people feel that they belong. I want to be sure we have time to talk through these other wines because we're talking about New York State as a whole. And one of the things we've been trying to show is that sustainability is at the core of New York Wine's long-term mindset. People are a crucial part of that. There's a question that's come in about climate change, and we'll be sure to address that, as Roman was already doing. But earlier, Roman was talking about rosé, and Maya mentioned how, Wolfer Estate has really helped open the way and transformed, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think of like summer in the Hamptons is all about rosé, but we wanted to show a less expected style because it's important to remember rosé has a huge range of styles as well. And so Maya, I was hoping you and I could talk about this. Again, Roman talked earlier about rosé's evolution in the state, but this is Chambourcin. I'm so excited that we have Chambourcin in the lineup. It's a French-American hybrid. It was developed in the late 1800s in France, but actually didn't become available commercially until the 1960s. I think of the core tasting signature of Chambourcin as like that's my tasting note, because it's all about exuberance and fresh fruit and hi, how are you? It's just very friendly, exuberant wine. Sometimes in a red style of Chambourcin, can be like too much that way. I've had some great reds from Chambourcin, so I'm not saying you can't do it, but it can really go exuberant. Rosé gives that nice in between. And so this, Maya, this is Lake Erie. This is Chambourcin. It is not what people expect. It is a super drinkable rosé. How does this play in the market? What do you think of this wine?
This is a delicious wine. I'm lucky to spend a little bit of time tasting with the team over at Maza, and this wine we talked about for a while because it's so delicious. And going back to what you said too about rosé and the Hamptons, I just find this to be such a funny point of note. In 2014, the Hamptons ran out of rosé, and that was around the time that Wolfer started producing rosé. It's so delicious that they drank their way through it. It was covered in Page 6, covered in the Washington Post. So when we talk about sustainability and also being able to produce more wine, grapes like this are actually really important in a region like New York. Lake Erie is actually, I think, the largest of the regions in terms of grape growing in vines planted. There are about 18,000 acres planted, and just for context, the Finger Lakes is about half the size. And 95% of the grapes produced there are Concord, but then you have really delicious and beautiful things like this Chambourcin. I could not agree with that tasting note more, Elaine. That's perfect for me. When I drink this wine, I can literally just see myself sitting outside with like the juices of like fruit just like dripping down my face, and I can't help myself. I just have to.
Yeah. Well, and we'll just geeky, quirky side notes. Chambourcin is a Tenturia grape, so it's actually the pulp is also colored, not just the skins. Like it has this like exuberant, juicy, like the fruit itself is juicy and dripping and like and which is so much fun. But Maya, as you're pointing out, this is a mildew resistant variety, and it's moderately cold tolerant. So it's it plays well in the region. We're going to talk in a minute about Vidal Blanc as well. So Lake Erie, I love that we have a wine from there in the lineup because, far western side of the state, we sometimes overlook that, but New York is doing really well in those more western areas as well for growing wine. I need to manage time, so I apologize for being a little quick, but let's like Pinot.
Let me just point out two things. If you wouldn't say Chambourcin, most people wouldn't even realize that it is a hybrid. And secondly, the beautiful acidity. Again, hot climates are struggling to have natural acidity, and that's what goes with the food. It cleanses your palate. It's vibrant. It's refreshing. So lovely rosé.
Yeah, well, and one of the things, like John just came out and said he grows hybrids, but the truth is actually Roman grows a little bit too, and because there are really great acid additions in wines. So if you have a warmer year, blend a little bit of hybrid into your vinifera, and you get this like like really incredible acidity. Sorry, my tasting notes tend to be sound effects and like body movements, but you know, I think you get the point. But okay, so Pinot though is known as being more vulnerable, a little bit more challenging to grow. And here we have this incredible example. And so, and Maya, I know you've spent a lot of time with this winery as well. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about this particular wine.
This is a Heart and Hands Mokushla is how you pronounce the name, State Reserve Pinot Noir. And I just love the team over at Heart and Hands, Susan and Tom, they're fantastic. And they moved to this region in search of the perfect location to make the perfect Pinot Noir. Makes sense when you think about the name Mokushla, which is an Irish term for my darling or my sweetheart.
I love that name so much.
Isn't that just wonderful? So they found some really interesting land on the northeast side of Cayuga Lake that has an Onondaga limestone band that runs through it. Not a lot are within that band. And that particular area has a pH neutral soil, which is really striking for the region. A lot of people are sitting on more acidic soils and they are at neutral. So they don't need to do a lot to ensure that the vines can soak up the nutrients they need to create beautiful wines. This one is a 2020. Again, that unbelievable growing season here in the Finger Lakes produced a really stunning red Pinot Noir for them. I was excited to write about it for Decanter. And gave this one 94 points because I think it's just stunning.
Yeah, I love that you were able to bring this wine into an international audience like in that way. So congratulations and thank you on that. And
2020 was even, you know, in general, I think it made even Long Island. It was 1995 was the best Pinot I ever made in my life in 2020. So it took 25 years to have a vintage that is, well, you know, absolute special again and make some fabulous wines.
Yeah,
it's so sticking to Roman, and sorry to cut you off, Elaine, because I feel like everybody's just trying, you know, in search of the perfect Pinot, trying to create the most beautiful one. I feel like people who love Pinot are almost for punishment in a way. And so it's really amazing to see something like this come out of 2020, but all of the effort and time you put into waiting for that next amazing vintage for something like this is amazing.
Yeah, the heartbreak grape.
Yeah, well, and I love too that, you know, Seneca Lake, whether by name or just by the wineries growing around it, tends to get a lot of attention. But we wanted to be sure to bring in Cayuga Lake through this wine and the other biggest lake in the Finger Lakes region. We have another Finger Lakes wine too with wine 5 from Element Winery, the Can't Stop, Won't Stop. We've been talking about climate change and how that makes kind of less predictable vintages. So guess what? Here's a great solution. You know, we mentioned how hybrid grapes are one thing to keep in mind. They can be more reliable, generally speaking, in difficult growing conditions. You can use them with vinifera as an acid addition, as a flavor addition when you need to. But this is a totally different sort of approach that Element Winery has taken of creating an open-minded blend, so to speak. And he calls it Can't Stop, Won't Stop because it's like the wine is designed to just be smashing good. You know, it's like just to be like, I just want something reliable that's yummy. And here we go. You know, there's still structure to it. There's still tons of length, but it's like smashing good. So Maya, tell us a little bit more again about this blend and this winery.
So this wine is made by Christopher Bates, who's an MS here in the Finger Lakes. And I love following him on Instagram. So I would say go follow Chris Bates on Instagram if you are on that app, because he's so honest about the challenges of making wine in a cool climate like the Finger Lakes. Outside of, you know, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, you just want to drink this, especially with a slight chill on it, and just enjoy it all day long. But on top of that, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, I think is also showing you that 2018 for the Finger Lakes was a really difficult growing season. Chris typically would put out wine under his label Element. And he also has a new brand called Focal Cellars, but he couldn't put out wine under either because of how the year treated his vineyards. So they ended up blending everything together to create this. It goes back to sort of what we're talking about with making the best out of a difficult year and creating something that's really easy drinking.
I think it's important for us to remember too that, you know, if we're talking about sustainability, having a viable business is actually the crucial touchstone of that being possible. And so taking a difficult year like 2018 and saying, we're going to make a wine, look, this wine totally works, and it's not what we've done before, but it's delicious. And for all of us on the trade side, finding ways to support that kind of effort in our wine programs is really important. So where's the space in your list or in your shop that you can open up to have a wine like this show well, and I love Susan's comment that like the 2020 vintage was just, it is now and will be always one of the icon years of New York State wine. 2020, there's so much brilliant wine that came out of it. And Susan is pointing out that for Pinot that year, they were able to use all of the fruit that came in. It was such a gorgeous growing season that all of the fruit went into this wine number 4 from Heart and Hands to make such a beautiful Pinot. In a year like 2018, there were a lot of challenges and fruit had to be sorted and decisions had to be made. And Christopher for Element made this decision, like, let's make a blend. So I would hope that's one of the takeaways for people viewing. Like, if you are leading a wine program and making buying decisions, how can you creatively make space for the less expected wines for challenging years? Because the truth is, going forward, we're going to see more and more creative expression and more unusual wine choices being made from wineries needing to make it work. So if we could show go ahead, Maya.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's a really interesting and important point, Elaine, especially being on the retail side of things, because you see innovation like this when times get tough. And if you are putting this on your shelf and not necessarily giving it the hand sell that it might need, then you're not doing it a service.
Yeah.
Wine is meant to be talked about. And then you're also building a connection with your customer base in that way too. So I think it's important also to note the education that sometimes needs to come with things like this.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it was Roman that made the comment. It's all about connection and building those relationships. And wine is a unique industry in that it's about long-term relationships. And the opportunity of a wine like this that's a little more unusual is that it offers you the room to talk about it, which means connecting with people. And if you connect with people and you show them something that they love, they're going to keep coming back. And that's the start of a long-term relationship. And I think, it's important for us to remember that's what wine's all about. So as we turn into wine 6, we wanted to be sure that we include some sweet wines in this ongoing series. And so we have here Vidal Blanc, Leonard Oaks Ice Wine, 2017 vintage. And I'm excited because it's from the Niagara Escarpment, yet another part of New York State that's doing really well. And John, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about Vidal Blanc, another hybrid, another French-American hybrid. It was made in the 1930s and originally developed as a grape to grow for cognac, so in France, but actually has turned out to do really well in cooler climate parts of the United States. Again, has great acid, but my understanding is Vidal Blanc also has thicker skin, so it tends to do well in disease pressure or mildew pressure. But John, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is thicker skinned. It can hang very late into the season. It does require fewer inputs, so it's not susceptible to a lot of the mildews like some of the vinifera are. So we grow it on a simpler training system. It's up on a high cordon, very easy to grow, and makes really, really great wine. And like I said, we can hang it late in the season to really get the maturity on it. So I think I haven't had a chance to taste this yet, but it does lend itself to this style of wine.
I think of Vidal Blanc as the gateway hybrid. We've been talking about entry points to wine and how sometimes it's a destination winery, sometimes it's a really welcoming business and family, and or a style like rosé. But Vidal Blanc is the variety that, it's celebrated for ice wine in Canada. It does really well in Niagara. They still grow it in France, though they probably only whisper about it. It shows how well hybrids in the right place, the right time, and the right style can do. It does tend to be made as a sweet wine, but it's not only made that way. So Maya, again, how does a wine like this play in the market? How does it do with consumers?
A wine like this actually is fairly easy to sell for the newer consumer because they like sweeter wines. And I say that as a broad generalization, but as we're growing up, right, we love soda, we love juice, and that's typically sweeter. Then we might start to trend towards liking a sweeter wine, and then you upgrade that your palate by maybe stepping over to an ice wine or a dessert style wine. It really makes people think a lot about sweetness in general. It's not cloying. It's actually refreshing. There's a good amount of acidity in here too that's just helping balance this wine. And it gives you an opportunity with customers to also talk about pairing wines and how you would pair something like this. I want a fruit tart so badly right now to eat with this wine.
I actually feel like people got excited about my New Orleans food comments. Oh my God, it's really good. But I was just there and the food is excellent. But I actually even feel like it would work well with duck. I had this like spiced duck confit with dirty rice when I was there, and they put a cherry compote on it. And I feel like the fruit from the compote with the spiced element would be such an incredible counterpoint to a wine like this, because of the acid. Because the thing about this kind of dessert wine, it works because the acidity is so high, so it just keeps cleansing your palate, So Roman, I want to bring it back to you. We have just a few more minutes, but one of the questions that's come in as we're finishing up is this question of climate change that you brought up. We've talked a lot about frost. The East Coast was hit really badly by frost this year, and actually the West Coast got it last year. So as you said, no region is immune. But the kind of the presumption is that, well, since Long Island is surrounded by the ocean, it's less likely that you're going to be dealing with those kind of issues. So could you clarify that point for us?
Well, I think we're in a very unique position on Long Island, but there is change, and this is going to be more dramatic. And I think I'd like to quote Charles Darwin: "It's not the strongest that will survive. It's not the smartest that will survive. It's the one who are adaptable to change." And I think this tasting showed really well different hybrids that in great years you make world-class wine that should charge $200 here. You can make these kinds of wines here in New York, on Long Island, in the Finger Lakes, and reaching out, getting better staff, getting more qualified vineyard management, winemakers lead you to this, and that's what makes it sustainable. There will be one year, God forbid, you have a hurricane. We haven't had a direct hit in since 1991 on Long Island, so so far so good. But in those great years, you will make the best wine, and you should be on the best wine list in the world. And then there will be a year where you have a difficulty and you have to adapt, and you either have some hybrids to back up. In our case, we've chosen to make wines in France, in Provence, in Argentina, so that and we make 100,000 cases of a dry cider by hand-picked apples. So we have different legs to stand on. If you have all your eggs in one basket, that will be a big problem in 10 years from now.
Yeah, so Roman's pointing out that in the midst of climate change, another business aspect of sustainability is diversifying your regional profile. But John Wagner has maintained a varietal diversity in terms of what you grow. Do you want to just briefly comment on that before we finish up?
Yeah, we have 20 different varieties of grapes planted in the ground. Like I said, our two main varieties are Riesling at 62 acres and Cab Franc at 28. So we do have a lot of eggs in one basket in those, or in two baskets, I should say. But we still have a lot of hybrid plantings that are important to us. And as Roman said, and you can oftentimes get a full crop in a year where you maybe are not going to get a full crop on some of the winter tender varieties like Gewürztraminer and Merlot. So,
and you have a brewery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Business diversity, brewery, and also your cafe. Yeah.
And having some of those more winter hardy varieties allows us to begin some of the viticultural practices. Like after the first killing frost, we start pruning our hybrids because they're more winter hardy, and we feel pretty confident that we can prune to a set number of buds and get them through the winter. We do wait to delay pruning decisions on our vinifera until springtime. And then we're able to check bud mortality and make pruning adjustments based on what we find. So it allows us some measure of mitigating risk.
Yeah. So we do need to finish up, but I would be remiss to not bring up the sparkling wine question, because it is one of the things that has grown in New York wine in across all regions. And actually, Rebecca has put a question in specifically about it. And so, Maya, I would like to close with you. I know you're a huge fan of New York State sparkling wine, and we have, like, in the comments, we have people planning to get together and make dinner, which I love. I think all of these wines would work really well with food. And so, Maya, just as a closing comment, can you tell us your thoughts about New York State sparkling wine? What are you especially excited about?
I'm just so excited that more people are making sparkling wine. I was writing a piece for a local publication here on New York sparkling, and in interviewing Nancy from Red Tail Ridge, owner and winemaker, she said that Americans torture themselves by not drinking sparkling wine every day, and I think she's right. So it's a personal mission of mine to drink as much sparkling as I can. And you're seeing production levels of sparkling in the Finger Lakes, but across New York go up. I think we're uniquely positioned, being a cool climate, where we're able to harvest a little earlier, maintain that acidity, and create some really beautiful sparkling wines out of the grapes we already grow. You're seeing even a lot of pet nats right now. It's just a new trend that seems to be flying off the shelf, and it's all delicious.
Well, and Long Island has done really well and has a good history of sparkling wine, traditional method, but also more recently, a lot of pet nats have been coming out of that area. And I would actually argue New York State started the pet nat movement in the United States. With producers, they're really committing to the style. We're going to talk about Hudson Valley next week. There's actually quite a lot of pet nats being made in that area as well. More recently, that some carbonated sparkling wines have been coming out of New York State as well. And in the past, people saw that as a less respectable way of making sparkling wine. But actually, the truth is people need to be able to afford what they drink if they're going to drink sparkling wine every day. And it still takes skill to make a base wine that is going to show up well as a sparkling method when it's carbonated. So remember that, right? Like, there's still a lot of skill that goes into that particular style as well. So next week, we're going to be talking about Hudson Valley. In 2 weeks, we're going to dig into Long Island wine. So some of the things that we've heard from Roman, we're going to talk about even more with some other producers. And then in the third week, we're going to be focusing in on, or in the 3 weeks from now, rather, in the fourth week of the series, we're going to be focusing in specifically on the Finger Lakes. So we'll hear even more about some of the things that John talked about today. I'm so grateful to the three of you for coming together today and sharing so much insight. The wines are fantastic. Thank you to the 4 producers who sent their wines in for this really beautiful lineup from around the state. And thank you so much to the New York Wine and Grape Foundation and to Adana Lane for making all of this happen. I hope all of you have enjoyed. We'd love to see your comments online. Please feel free to tag all of us on Instagram if you're going to post there, and feel free to send us personal notes as well. I hope to see you in the next several weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you to our panelists, and thanks to all of you for attending New York Wines Online, What It Means to Be Bold. So a recording of today's webinar will be published to the New York Wine and Grape Foundation YouTube channel in the next couple of days, and we'll follow up sending that link out to all of you. And then, as Elaine mentioned, the next episode, Boldly Intense, Hudson Valley, will take place on August 2nd at 4 p.m. Eastern. So same day of the week, same time. The link to register, I think Ella dropped that in the chat. So if you need to register, go ahead and do that. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.